All right, well, good morning and welcome to this morning's program, Coffee with a Curator Furniture, Crafting a North Carolina Legacy. My name is Stacy and I handle adult education here at the museum, and we're so glad that you're spending your morning with us. Uh, Please feel free to type any questions that you have for our guest speaker into the chat. At the end of our program, our adult programs intern will ask our speaker as many of your questions as time allows. So it's my honor to introduce and welcome this morning's speaker, Michael Osmond, Curator of Decorative Arts here at the North Carolina Museum of History. Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am going to do a lecture this morning about our newest exhibit that I curated, Furniture Crafting a North Carolina Legacy. It will be open until March the 31st of this year. So I look forward to seeing you here in the exhibit, and hopefully we'll learn something today about what's in the exhibit. Okay, when I started working on this exhibit, uh, I started out, I said in my label copy, when we get ready first thing in the mornings, we hurriedly grab clothes from our chest of drawers or wardrobe. And then I realized, not everybody uses a chest of drawers. Not everybody even knows what a wardrobe is. A lot of people have walk-in closets now. So some of the furniture that we used to use and consider valuable and a family heirloom is not being used anymore and has no purpose, but may be decorative. So this was also a learning experience for me to realize that people view furniture differently and view the pieces differently and view, family heirlooms differently than what museum curators do. Um, but I thought this was a cute graphic here with the children going through the doors. That's something I used to do in my grandmother's house that she admonished me for. And when you think of North Carolina in the 18th century, you don't really think of us as being a major furniture manufacturer like you did of Boston, Philadelphia, or New York. North Carolina changed colonial capitals or meeting places quite a few times before they finally settled on Raleigh as a capital in the 1790s. They met in Halifax, they met in New Bern, they met in Fayetteville, Hillsborough, and then, of course, in Raleigh. And the cabinet makers or those appearing to profit from the population changes moved to these regions that were popular. And for the most part, North Carolina was still very, very rural. Many were still farmers working their own land, and they didn't consider themselves cabinet makers. If they needed furniture, they made the furniture, or there was somebody in the town or village or hamlet that could make furniture. It was basic furniture. They needed furniture in their homes. They needed it stable. They needed it to last. So the makers didn't consider themselves what we consider cabinet makers, like a step above of like general furniture making. So a lot of the furniture makers and cabinet makers in the beginning, they were in all sorts of businesses. Many of them were in the undertaking business, like the Voglers and also like Thomas Day of Milton. It's like they could put you away, they could take you away, and they could also furnish your house. So it was this business on top of business that kept them in business. C.D. Hendricks owned a livery stable. He owned a coach business. He owned a funeral business, and he also owned a hotel. And what many of these early makers would do if they were farmers, they would farm during the spring and summer and early fall, and then the late fall, and then the winter was when they would work on their cabinet making business. The early makers of furniture were basic carpenters and joiners, your basic joints, your basic construction techniques. When you're coming down the Great Wagon Road in the 18th century, your wagon only holds so much. You might take a prized possession, but you think about many of these people came from overseas, from Europe, and they weren't able to bring all their possessions with them. So certainly as people came up from South Carolina, as they came from the coast, and as they came down from the Great Wagon Road, their resources were very limited. So they were really using basic furniture. And that is what these early carpenters and joiners and makers did, was basic, strong, solid furniture. And as time went on, these makers specialized. They became what would be known as cabinet makers, doing decorative techniques, more stylish furniture. More stylish furniture was also being imported from England and from larger cities up north and from the south into North Carolina. So they were getting all these influences from other regions. Early on, these cabinet makers were a one-stop shop. They had their wood, they processed the wood there in the shop, they stained it, they built it, and they delivered it to you. Not only were there European cabinet makers in North Carolina, but there were also enslaved craftsmen as well. Unfortunately for the enslaved craft persons, there are very few names that are recorded for us to go back to and study. There are unnamed craftsmen that have not received their due. The chair here to your left is just a fantastic chair. It was also one of those subsistence kind of pieces of furniture, early made. Here is the enslaved person's chair that I was speaking of from Hertford County. And the table here is from Franklin County. This was made by an enslaved person who gave this to the family that they were enslaved. And what I was speaking to here, there were sources of workers for these early cabinet making shops. They could be apprentices. There could be journeymen who went to different cabinet shops throughout the state and throughout the colonies at the time. And then when we became a country. But unfortunately, enslaved persons could not determine their own future. That was determined by their enslavers. So if an enslaved craftsperson showed an aptitude for making furniture or possibly interested in furniture making, they may or might not have been able to practice a craft they were interested in. So that did limit their opportunities and limit their freedom. But from these two examples, you can see that they were able to express some kind of freedom and artistry in these two examples. Next. And here are two regional examples. What happened because North Carolina the capitals moved around and did not settle until 1790. Regional differences came about. Of course, in the Piedmont, there was more of the backcountry German settlers. You'll see in this piece, very similar to Pennsylvania, dower chest and painted chest, had certain construction techniques. You can see the dovetails, the breadboard ends of joining the top. This tall piece here was from Eastern North Carolina. It's known as a China press. These extremely tall pieces were regional to Eastern North Carolina. There was much more, of course, because we were closer to the coast, a much more close alliance to Great Britain. And you do see that characteristic in this piece of furniture. Next. There were, again, we talked about the centers of North Carolina. North Carolina, because the capital moved around, we didn't really see those centers. And so the cabinet making trades were scattered throughout the state. There was one first centralized location, and that was in Milton, and that was with Thomas Day. Thomas Day opened up the Milton Tavern, opened up his business there starting in 1848. At the time, Thomas Day was making almost 12% of his furniture, and a wide variety of furniture that you see here. Thomas Day was adept at making different styles and also catering to his client's pocketbook and his patrons' taste. And these are from an earlier exhibit we had of Thomas Day here at the museum. Next. The early factories in North Carolina were usually in people's backyards or behind their stores or other businesses. DCS Westmoreland started the first chair factory in Thomasville after he came back from the Civil War. He was making a few dozen chairs per week. Later on, he was making many dozens of chairs per week and had as many as 20 employees. This is his chair, one of his chairs on the right that is in the exhibition. His factory opened in 1890. The factory closed before 1900, but his family did open a furniture store in Thomasville. So Westmoreland really did contribute to the early moniker that still stands today for Thomasville of Chair City, USA. Next. So why did the furniture industry, get this question all the time, so why did the furniture industry come to North Carolina? Number one, I would probably say would be the trees. North Carolina still, even during the late 1800s, early 1900s, North Carolina was still very, very rural. There were millions of acres of virgin timber that had never been forested. And that was truly natural resources. We also had hydroelectric power. We also had a never-ending cheap source of labor from tenant farmers who were glad to come work in a factory. Unfortunately, most of the early factories were very dangerous places to work. Of course, no safety control, all sorts of fire hazards, but also there was no heating, of course, no cooling. It could be a dangerous place to work. But these poor farming families and tenant farmers could count on a weekly salary, which they could not depend on from tenant farming. Also, there was ample banking resources within the region in High Point and the surrounding regions. Also, the railroads. Just prior to the Civil War, but particularly after the Civil War, the railroad lines expanded across the country. And for High Point, they were like a central hub. So furniture could be moved out all over the country with ease. So all these factors converged to make it accessible for North Carolina to become the furniture capital of the world. Next. So here we have the Thomasville Chair Company and Finch Furniture Company. How successful were they? For instance, these two companies, which were joined together by the same maker, they had 86 acres in 1934, 86 acres of manufacturing space. They had over 22 acres under one roof. They had 1 million square foot of manufacturing, and they employed 1,375 men. Next. By 1922, over 300,000 acres of virgin timber in North Carolina had been clear cut. And as you can see here on the right photograph, the right image, this was how a lot of the land was left. So this led to tremendous flooding and erosion in the mountains and the foothills, causing problems that, you know, sometimes we're still dealing with today. Horace Kephart, who came to North Carolina and visited, was just appalled at the sight of the mountains and the foothills where the furniture industry had deforested, and was truly upset, as you see by his quote here. He was actually instrumental in getting the Great Smoky Mountains National Park solidified in 1934. So there was this call for conservation of land and property. North Carolina was making so much furniture that, and a lot of people were getting into the furniture making business that didn't know what they were doing. So there was a story going around that when North Carolina furniture was delivered to its destination, that the people who received the furniture didn't know where to use the crate or whether to use the piece of furniture. So a lot of furniture was being shipped out of the state at this time. Next, Drexel was one of the case studies that I used for manufacturing and early employee relations. These two photos here, one is from Dixie and one is from White Furniture. These are really two quite rare photos. If you see here in front of the Dixie photograph, you see very young boys. Also in the White Furniture warehouse image, you will see a group of African Americans. Pictures of African Americans in the furniture industry, even up until the mid 20th century, were extremely rare. Their pay was even less than that of child laborers. For instance, in the Drexel case study in 1907, a 10-year-old boy would make 3 cents an hour. At 12 years old, he would graduate up to 4 cents an hour. In 1914, adult white male was making 13 cents an hour, and African-American male would have been making much less. Also, African-American males, even up until the early to mid 20th century, were not even welcome on the manufacturing floor. They were doing the task of hauling and unloading and that sort of thing. In 1934, an adult white male was making 40 cents per hour. However, early on, we'll see the disparaging, salary comparisons to an executive versus a worker. Notice in 1934, an average white male worker working on the floor would have made 40 cents per hour. But in 1939, an executive at Drexel was making $125,000 a year. So that was quite a large salary for an executive in 1939, a lot more than a 40 cents hourly wage worker. Next. Some companies like Drexel even bought their own timber. So they even built their own railroads. So they could really control the cost of their product from farm to finish. And I love this image here at the bottom of the horse. This horse actually worked for Drexel hauling furniture and timber for 21 years, I believe. Next. By the early 19-teens and massive furniture production here in North Carolina, You see the rise of early small town and small family business run furniture stores. This is one such early store. This is Gloston and Faust Furniture, about 1910. It was a place called Company Shops, crossroads at a railroad junction. We now know this place to be Burlington. So Company Shops was incorporated into Burlington in the early 20th century. Next. By 1921, you see a concerted effort to showcase all of North Carolina's furniture in one location. This had never been done before. People did it individually, but people thought that we need to showcase it all together. So in 1921, they opened the Southern Furniture Exposition Building. It had 249,000 square feet. Their first show was in 1921. 700 people visited the show, and they sold $2 million of furniture. Today, in comparison, the market has over 11.5 million square feet. They have over 80,000 visitors. They sell over $6.7 billion in home furnishings. And that is the largest economic impact to the state, which would include all sporting events throughout the state. So a much different market today than what it was in 1921. Next. The furniture industry, we always think about the furniture, but it also gave rise to many other industries. You had to, furniture manufacturers learned early on that as a small manufacturer, you couldn't make the hardware, you couldn't make the mirrors, you couldn't make the shipping crates, you couldn't publicize it. So all these other businesses came to High Point: the publishing industry, the magazine industry, advertising industry, the paneling industry, the shipping industry. All of these were located to High Point. You also had to have machine shops to repair all this new fancy machinery that was coming out. So these machine shops located in High Point. Also, other North Carolina industries flourished. One industry in Wilkesboro that flourished tremendously was a Lineberry Cart Company. You could put all your lumber, take it to the different levels of manufacturing throughout the factory. You could load the furniture up on the cart, and then you could roll it right off into the railroad cart to pack the furniture. One of the advertising claims of the Lineberry Cart Company was that the cart could hold 1,000 pounds without creaking or groaning. And one interesting fact about the North Carolina furniture industry and the rise of these carts, or railroad carts as they were early known, was that a lot of the factories built their loading docks level with the railroad cars. So literally they could roll the furniture and their products right from the factory floor right onto the railroad car. In just a few years, in the early 1920s up until 1924, North Carolina sent out over 26,000 train carloads of furniture throughout the United States. Next. After World War I, but in particular World War II, there was this rise in the industry to create more of an antique and polished look and history for America. America still, you think about it, in 1934 during the World Wars, we were still a very young country. We didn't have the ancient antique history that you saw in Europe, and that many of these manufacturers and owners of these companies from North Carolina who went to war and spent time in Europe. So these manufacturers and designers who served in Europe decided to come back to America and create these antique looking pieces of furniture that harken back to the colonial era or even farther back, like you saw in Europe. So they began to recreate these period antique looking pieces for, at that time, it was known as modern furniture. And these companies would advertise that they could produce 18th century styles. They could produce modern styles and continental styles of furniture from Europe. So a very, very popular thing to do, and remained popular up until the 1950s. Furniture companies were, manufacturers were very eager to sell this new furniture and to create this history, this instant history for America and the American home. And so they advertised to that. Happiness begins at home. It begins with a well-furnished home, with a happy family. If you want a happy family and a happy home, you want nice furniture to furnish your home and to create this atmosphere. They began to target families and begin to target women. If you wanted to look good in your home, buy this chair or buy this piece of furniture. If you want to impress your friends, buy this piece of furniture to impress your friends or to let them know that you have a happy home. Probably not too much different than what they do today, actually. And in the 50s and 60s, the consumer base changed. People were like, this is modern times. We want something different. We want something new. So what the companies began doing was to go to interior designers, was to go to architects and other designers and say, hey, start designing this modern, new, specialized furniture for our home. Frank Lloyd Wright designed several lines of furniture for Heritage Henredon. Also, Drexel Furniture began making this modern style furniture. The Drexel cart here, which is in the exhibit, told their patrons you could have a happy, very hospitable home if you use their beverage cart. And then also Broyhill Furniture designed their Brasilia collection from the modern cutting edge architecture of Brasilia, the new capital of Brazil. So cutting edge designs and furniture for the new life of North Carolinians and the country. Next. Also, design companies and manufacturers also started manufacturing furniture and home furnishings using celebrities and stars and early influencers' names like Martha Stewart. Next. Also, you see historic sites like Biltmore start partnering with these furniture manufacturers and companies to sell the historic site. Colonial Williamsburg did a collection. Winterthur Museum did a collection. Also, Craftique did several copies of our Thomas Day collection as well, and produced those in a limited number. So even museums got in on the process of selling and promoting their museums and historic sites through furniture collections with North Carolina makers. Next. And in the early 90s and mid 90s and even into the 2000s is when we see the competition from overseas. And we we look at this and, and really kind of think, oh, how devastating this was to North Carolina and the home furnishings industry here. And it was, many companies folded or were sold out to conglomerates, large conglomerates who no longer wanted to keep these small town businesses. They wanted to move overseas where they could get the labor much cheaper. But really, it's no different than when the furniture industry left the Midwest and upper Midwest to come to North Carolina in the late 1890s and early 20th century. And many of these companies pulled out of those locations to resettle in North Carolina because they could get that labor at 10 cents and 14 cents and 40 cents an hour to make their company's furniture. So really, these companies really just did the same thing in the 1990s. They moved overseas to where labor was so much cheaper. A lot of North Carolina companies actually would ship the plans and ship the wood to China or India or other places, other countries in Asia. They would actually make the furniture. They would ship the frames and the springs back to North Carolina, where they would be upholstered in North Carolina factories. And this went on for years and actually still goes on with some companies today. This image here, poignant image that you will see featured in the exhibit, is from Mebane, the Craftique furniture factory that closed, which was such a devastating blow to the city of Mebane and to the state of North Carolina. Next. So what you will see today in North Carolina, the biggest industry that is booming is the bespoke custom industry in North Carolina. There is a lot of custom upholstery that you will see going on in our state. Catawba College has a program in upholstery. There are people who start the program, which is approximately 2 years long. People who are starting in the upholstery program at Catawba College have jobs in their first year lined up when they graduate in 2 years. Such an astounding, booming business. And also custom crafting of small furniture and custom furniture again by these different makers, cabinet makers and different companies. For instance, in Angier, North Carolina, it's a very small rural town that has declined drastically, like many North Carolina towns throughout the state. Was a local farming town, really dependent on farming and tobacco. There was up until a couple of years ago, there was an upholstery business there in Angier that Ralph Lauren used to have all of his custom upholstery done in Angier, North Carolina, and then he would have it shipped out to his clients throughout the country and throughout the world. So North Carolina is still thriving in the industry. It's not as much mass manufacturing as it was, but it's still thriving and still continuing to grow and to diversify into the home furnishings industry. Next. So thank you to our Museum of History Associates, our foundation, through our patrons like you, to Beanstalk Furniture Library, the High Point Museum, Bernhardt, the High Point Historical Society, Marion and Abbott, Bruce Johnson, and to Stephen Killian, and also to Walter Magazine for supporting us in this exhibit, and to you, our patrons who are joining to us today and who continue to to support the museum and our programming. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael, so much. We don't have any questions in the chat right now, but one thing that came across to me was to talk about more about the reason for that kind of shift to the modern style of furniture making in like the 50s and 60s.
Right. Right. This was something that was vital to kind of revitalize the industry. It would also, it was also good for the designers and the architects to get their name out there and promote their business, but also to show that they were keeping up with all these new standards and new ways of thinking. You also see, because of this, you have the extremely increasing diversification of advertising, the TV, color TV, all these specialty magazines. So they had to upkeep and promote the industry. So these designers and celebrities really just upped the game on furniture manufacturing for the state.
Great, thank you so much. And then maybe just one more question about kind of like how the furniture industry continued to expand and like how far reaching it went towards like the rest of the United States and then internationally.
Right. North Carolina typically still now is roughly, they call it the 90-90 rule. 90% of the manufacturing and 90% of the resources are from the High Point region. Still from that as High Point as the nucleus, so to speak, and about a 90-mile radius around High Point is where it's mainly concentrated still. But there are the outliers, like I said, that do the custom and bespoke work that are not within that 90-mile radius.
Great, thank you so much.
And then I think we have actually one more question. Is there a location in North Carolina that creates the bulk of the furniture now? And any comments on why there?
Again, I would say probably around the High Point region. Still, there are other places, like I mentioned, that do create the bespoke furniture and the upholstery. Transportation has also gotten easier, so they're able to bring it to the High Point location. They still manufacture around High Point, but High Point really is the focus area for everybody to bring their goods to. You will see people from all over the world, all over North Carolina, all over the United States, where they will bring their goods to High Point and where they gauge the interest of their furniture. The High Point market is the testing ground. So if they create this line of furniture and nobody makes any orders, then they know this line is not desirable. So they'll come back the next year with a different line. So High Point really is a testing ground for all these new companies and their products. And it also is a great place for upstarts, new designers, new manufacturers, and new home furnishings people to sell their wares. It's no longer just the furniture, upholstered pieces. It's also pottery. It's also art. It's also antiques. It's all the accessories that goes on the furniture that is selling in High Point, and all these companies that are starting in North Carolina now. So it's not just the furniture, it's all these other industries, like the early industry, that have relocated and are being manufactured in North Carolina.
Great.
One last question. We have actually two questions about the factory space. Any idea about what has been done to repurpose it?
A lot of the factories have been turned into like malls or antique malls. They've turned into mixed use, where there might be living quarters, there might be retail, there might be offices. So really mixed use buildings of retail, living and restaurant, excuse me, restaurant spaces and that sort of things. And community centers and some rural manufacturers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for this incredible behind the
you.
scenes look at the exhibit. And thank you to all those of you who joined us today. If you haven't already gotten to see it, Furniture, Crafting a North Carolina Legacy, the exhibit is up through March. So we invite you to come on down to the museum and check it out. So yeah, thank you guys. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks, Michael.
Thank y'all.
Bye.